will fully admit, like, I have worked less hours in youth ministry since we made this change and seen more growth.
Ryne, what is the best way to get parental buy-in for your youth ministry?
He's like, people aren't coming to churches for fun. He's like, if I'm lost, church is the last place I'm going for fun.
Like, what you win them with, you win them to.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of addresses this, where I think the students that are there looking for entertainment, like they were entertained.
You see things as a menu, as you've talked about before. That's that attitude that it creates. It's like, well, you have this for them, but like, where is this for me? And when you see it as a roadmap, you realize that it's like, okay, hey, I've gone through spiritual transformation. I have been a disciple. I've started to make this my own. I've started to engage. Well, now what are you going to teach me? It's like, no. Like, your job is now to be unleashed to go teach others.
Based on like some of the conversations we've had with youth leaders, like, I'm kind of surprised it's not higher. Like,
what are ways to increase consistent participation among students in your youth group?
Four-chair discipleship model that we use, like, chair one, non-believer; chair two, believer; worker, actively serving. And then you have disciple maker, who is literally investing in other people. And so, where are you on this roadmap, and how can we advance you to the next step? It was the Wild West.
PETA was a lot less active in the 90s.
This is frustrating, but maybe we should lessen our expectations, because even Jesus chose young people to set the pace for everybody else.
Number one, right off the top, 68% of student pastors say their biggest frustration is... Well, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. My name is Ryne, and this is Keith. And today we're going to be addressing the top 5 major student pastor frustrations and how you can avoid them. So stay tuned. Now, Keith, we found an article that lists the top 12 frustrations of student pastors.
Yeah.
And we were reading through these and we're like, we need to do an episode on these. And so we've touched on some of these topics here and there, but the goal of this topic, I would say, is to help people understand you're not alone. So you might...
I know, none of these were surprising to me
Yes.
when I saw all 12 of them.
But if we did all 12 in this episode, it'd probably
Be several hours.
So we're just going to do the top 5.
We're going to do the top 5,
But
which is like the majority. I mean, like the number 12 was only 3%. So I wouldn't even say that's like the top.
Yeah.
3% of youth pastors say that this is frustrating. That's not really like a top tier issue in my mind. But the top 5 range from 68% down to 22%. So
so they surveyed some youth pastors. This was done by a Lifeway research project, and we'll drop that link in the comments.
You can see the whole 12 in the link.
Yeah, absolutely. But this isn't just like Keith and I's like, what do you think are the top 12? This is, they actually surveyed youth pastors, and they listed the top frustrations. And so we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about each of these, but we're also probably going to do some future episodes addressing each of these individually. So hopefully that'll be helpful to you as well. But number one, right off the top, 68% of student pastors say their biggest frustration is parents not prioritizing their teens' spiritual growth. And I think that definitely doesn't surprise me, especially as we get into a more, culture where spirituality is becoming less and less of a family thing.
Well, and also, I mean, we've talked about this several times of, students that are coming to Christ, they're like the first ones in their family.
Yeah.
And then we're just, we're seeing the ripple effects of that, like how, parents aren't, so like that's one thing to expect that. Like when a student is not from a Christian family, they come to Christ. Of course, their parents aren't going to be prioritizing their spiritual well-being. But I think what makes it frustrating is when there's Christian parents that aren't prioritizing their teenagers, spiritual well-being. And I think that's been the journey that we've talked about too, like of just how we're seeing rapid growth, and they're almost like competitive with their teenager, like where they're kind of squashing, because they're revealing like how much they're not growing. And so they're like dismissing what the Lord's done at camp, or like, it's like, well, that's just a spiritual high, or, that's not going to last. Or we're like, come on, like encourage your student, like, really, really bless them to prioritize their own spiritual walk. And so, so we're seeing, that it's mainly with Christian parents that aren't really prioritizing their own spiritual growth, but it's not trickling down to, to caring for their teenagers.
Now, if a youth pastor is feeling that, they've probably said this at some point in their youth pastor life: if only our adult ministry would step up and help parents. Okay. Yeah. Now, for you, I don't know if we've ever actually shared this, but you did step out of youth ministry for a while.
Yeah.
And into the scary world of adults.
Yep.
What would be your response to that youth pastor who's just saying, if only the the senior pastor or our adult discipleship pastor, if only they would be doing what we're doing in youth group, then I wouldn't have this frustration. What would be your response to that?
So that's what I did. So I was promoted out of my sweet spot, so to speak, of youth ministry. So we were seeing gospel advancing ministry happening in our student ministry. And then our location pastor was like, hey, would you be interested in doing this for our whole congregation, to kind of measure success this way and to, equip our people to share the gospel. And I quickly realized, like less than 6 months in, that there was a lot more resistance from adults to do these things than from teenagers. And so I would say, like, being on both sides of that. So like I became the associate pastor and was really focusing on, doing this, within our adult congregation. It wasn't the same. It was a lot more difficult. There was a lot more resistance, and there was a lot more complacency, a lot less boldness. And of course there's bright spots. Like there were some incredible things that, our adults are like, setting the pace for, some of our students as well. But the majority, it was kind of sad. Like it was disappointing to kind of see like how, much infighting there was, or like there was, conflict, or, that was what was distracting them from living out the gospel. But teenagers just like, let's do this. And they're like, all right, what are we doing? Like, they're just like really motivated to join a cause. And so I would say from that flip side, give them the benefit of the doubt. But I would say, if we're going to lead in this area, sometimes, and we see this, like, how Jesus chose, like the method of him changing the world was using young people. So I do think that this is frustrating, but maybe we should lessen our expectations, because even Jesus chose young people to set the pace for everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so I think we can learn a lot from that too. Like where, yes, we're frustrated that parents aren't taking ownership, but also we can resource them to do that. Mm-hmm. Even if you're not a parent of a teenager, you still have the authority of God's word that you can teach biblical principles to help with parenting, to help ownership. There's tons of resources nowadays for parents, to raise godly children. And I'm one of them. Like I was first generation Christian. So like I'm learning how to raise my sons in the faith, like, cause I have no, I don't know what to do, Mm-hmm. And so, but what we found, there's tons of great resources now available. Like, authors and podcasters and stuff that are investing in parents to raise their kids in a godly way. So be a curator of those and send those to the parents. But just understand that your teens in your youth ministry might set the pace for revival in the rest of the church as well.
No, I think that's probably helpful maybe for somebody to hear, because I know there's been a lot of drives home where I kind of look around and I'm like, if only somebody else would do this, then I wouldn't have this. And the reality I've come to is just, hey, be fruitful where you're at, be faithful where you're at, invest in these kids, invest in parents. But at the same time, understand that, a lot of times the student is probably going to set the pace for the spiritual aspect of the family.
Well, and also like, it's easy to point fingers like to adult ministry leaders and stuff. And, there's so much more. They're having to reverse a lot of things, or, like undo, decades long of, habits, or, and so for them just to turn something on a dime, like, just to turn the ship to where it's like, all right, now we're, focusing. And so I think with that, give them the benefit of the doubt. But from the parents' perspective, we as youth leaders can resource them. Like we can, even if we're not parents ourselves, we can, stand on the authority of God's word and train and equip parents, to navigate these crazy teenage years.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So number one, 68% say parents not prioritizing their teen spiritual growth was their biggest frustration. Number two, 45% say lack of consistent participation of students in their youth ministry.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have any experience with this at all. Just kidding. This was...
Well, you probably have more data, like you're like the data guru, you want to collect and stuff. Like I was thinking, I know it's not, I know our students don't attend every week.
Yeah.
Or, there's a core that does. I don't know that number yet. I need to keep track of it a little bit better. But do you have that for your youth ministry? So what's the average attendance for students in your youth ministry in a month?
Yeah. So if we look at total, just kind of breaking it down, last year, the past 12 months, I don't have them right in front of me, so it's a little bit of ballpark, but the last 12 months, we saw about a little over 320 individual students. Out of those 320, so you've got my cousins visiting for the weekend or whatever, everything. So 320 individual students. Out of those 320, we saw about 140 participate on at least a once a month level looking back the past 3 months. So in essence, if you look at a quarter, they at the very minimum attended like once a month. When you look even closer at that, our average weekly attendance, I mean, we meet Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. So our average week, just like nightly attendance was probably somewhere around 80-ish, looking over rolling 12 months. So 320 to like 140 to like 80. And so it kind of gives you a picture of, there are a lot who they only come once, or in this particular frustration, there are a lot who we kind of play that game of like, oh, they were here tonight, but if the regulars were here tonight, look how many kids we would have had. And I think we've all probably done that.
Yeah.
And the reality is we have to understand that perfect attendance is not godliness. Now, I want to be careful in saying be committed to the body of believers, as it says in Hebrews, absolutely, but I don't think I need to convince any of our audience of that. But I got caught up in this trap that like, man, if they would just be here consistently, then we could do this. And that's true, right? The more they're there, the more they're going to get truth they're going to be invested in. But the reality is what changed for me, there's one student, she's a high schooler now, and she just wasn't coming very often because she's super into softball. She's going to go play, Division I softball in a couple of years. Like that's, she loves doing that. And she was gone for a couple months, honestly. And she came back, she was like, hey, I was sharing the gospel like with my friend and they said this, like, what do I do? And I was like, in my mind, I kind of would be like, what do you mean you're sharing the gospel? Like, you haven't even been to youth group.
How would you do that without us? Like,
but the reality was like, it just smacked me upside the head. It's like, here's somebody that, God has placed in this. Now, different houses, we're going to make different choices in terms of what we prioritize. But here's somebody that God has placed among a group of lost teenagers who is living out her faith boldly and sharing her faith. And my response, my thought kind of arrogantly was like, well, you're not even coming to youth group. And so it was just kind of a smack upside the head to me to be like, if kids are inconsistent because they're doing all these different things, well, guess what? The more we train them, the more they're going to go live out their faith in areas that we will never reach. And so that was kind of what changed it to me. Now, are there some ways to help your students be more consistent? Yes. But that kind of mindset kind of changed it for me to kind of realize, be like, okay, you might have a job that you're really invested in because you're trying to save up for something. How arrogant for me to be like, I can't believe you're not coming to youth group because your home life is a mess and you're having to, make money to provide and you're faithfully attending Sunday morning services. And my attitude is like, why aren't you coming to youth group? And it's like, no, unleash them where they're at in order to be difference makers for the kingdom.
Yep. Yeah. And I think with that too, one, we can, I think, since the pandemic, it's changed a little bit as far as like just church commitment in general. Like, and people are watching online and saying like, I attend this church, and they've never been visited in person, or they don't visit in person anymore. Like they're not part of an actual body of Christ. They're just more, consumers. And so we want to, guard against that mentality. But I think so. I'll actually talk on this a little bit later during our 1 minute questions. But I think that's the consistent participation. In short, I think if you are making your gatherings valuable to them, they'll be more consistent.
Yep.
So, and I'm not talking about like handing away iPads or, making like entertaining or whatever, like, because the world will have more to offer in that regard as far as like entertainment or distraction, like. But if you say like, hey, we're part of this bold vision, like that we can't do this without you. And we're also seeing the body of Christ lived out in community, like gospel community that, is attractive to people that are like, I can't live without this. And if we demonstrate that consistently, I think we're going to see more consistent participation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So number 3, we have 33% of student pastors that were surveyed were frustrated because, they can't, or they're not really gaining ground on undoing what the world teaches their students.
Yeah. Well, you talked about that with adults. Like that is.
Well, I mean, they have time, of just like habits and foundations that they've built, over time where they've gotten comfortable. We have competing distractions. It's never been more easy to be distracted in this world. And so with that, there's so much influence from, of course, like social media and that it's, with the average, this is now becoming a huge thing in our world today, where even like, non-believers are realizing, hey, screens are bad. Like, or, like that, like we have in our state where, where we're sitting right now, like they just banned cell phone use in schools. And I think that's just like it's going to be a continuing trend where people are realizing like the effects of teenagers' mental health. And so, I mean, on average, I think the most recent stat that I saw was like 7 or 8 hours a day that they're spending on screens apart from school.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we talk about undoing what the world has done, I want to, contextualize that a little bit, because sometimes it's just a kid's family life who's been blown apart, who's coming to youth group, and we're like, I hate to say this, but there are some kids that it's like, God's just going to have to do this because we don't have the resources. We can't help. Like, this is such a mess that it's just like I'm going to pray for you. Like that's really all I can do. We even have counselors we can get them involved in, but like, you leave youth group every night and you are going home to a home where you're not safe and you're struggling with all this. So there's that. But then there's the kid who's just, discipled by the world because, well, that's their choice and whatever. And that can be frustrating. And at certain times it has been frustrating. But what I found is that this is a generation that's hungry for truth, like generations I haven't seen in the past. Yeah. And so I think that post-pandemic kind of woke a lot of kids up to it. In fact, Barna did a research study and they found out that trust in every institution amongst the younger generation decreased throughout the pandemic and the pandemic response, except for one, and that was their elders. So their elders were the only, people group that their trust actually increased in. And so I think there's a lot of kids who are hungry for truth. And so I think if you're looking for it, I found that to be actually lessening, because kids are going down the rabbit holes of what the world has to offer. And they're going like, okay, I've done it. This isn't really what's working for me. And so we have kids coming to a point of trusting Christ because they want something different. We don't have to convince them that like something else is better for them. So that would be my response. Yeah.
I mean, so case in point, like I had a parent that I was talking to yesterday who has a middle school son. She's a single mom trying to raise him. She's bringing him to church and youth group. She's very involved. And he's at the point now where he's wondering where he fits in. Like, like at school, like if he is compassionate, towards people, he's called names, like, like, oh, you must be homosexual because you like that kid because you're sticking up for him. Yeah. Like that kind of like, on the opposite end. Yeah. And then if he laughs at someone's misfortune, like someone falls and he laughs at it, then he's now included in with like the cool kids. And she's like, I don't even know what to say. Like, what do I, like, it feels like he can't win in either way in making friends. And so he feels lonely. And so with that, I was like, well, take a value-based approach. So in other words, like you're going to be friends with people that share the same value, like the things that you care about and that, the things that so it's like, don't worry about like, what am I going to do to fit in with one crowd or the other? What do I do that's right? Like, let me do what's right. And then I don't care. Like if I'm made fun of because I'm doing something that's right, then that's their fault. Like that's like on them, not me. And so even just helping that mindset of undoing what the world teaches them and teaches, world will teach them to laugh at someone's expense or whatever, or to be cool, you need to be a bully or to make fun of other people or whatever. And it's like, no, we are cool. Like when we do the right thing, like that's what's going to matter. Like, and I was like, and by the way, you're not going to have any of the same friends in middle school that, when you become an adult, like none of the same friends are going to be around, like, and especially if they don't have your values, like, there's exceptions to that, but for the most part, undoing what the world has to teach them, just help them to say like, to distinguish what's right and wrong, always stand up for what's right and what the Lord would want you to do. And if friends reject you as a result of that, like that's not, and it just makes it easier. Like it like relieves that, like, that pressure bubble of like, oh, I need to do this to fit in. Or I need to do this to
that anxiety,
to be accepted by the world. It's like, no, you do what's right. And if they don't accept you, then that's wrong. Like, that's on them. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the next one, 27%, number 4, say balancing the needs of unchurched teens with growing those who do have a faith. Yeah.
And I think this one is one I can actually share an example that we talked about recently where I had a kid. So 27% of youth pastors are frustrated saying, well, these kids who aren't Christians yet, how do I kind of teach to them and disciple them or get them to a point where I can disciple them versus the kid over here who's like, I've been in church since I was little. Like I know all this. And when we focus on information, those two seem opposed. And when we focus on transformation, all of a sudden those two work together. So I was having a conversation with a student and they've kind of, they've had their faith for a while and they were kind of like, hey, how come we do like some topics for like new believers, but like we don't do a lot of topics for like, mature believers. And I was kind of like, well, and I had to kind of like pray before I responded. I was like, I didn't say this, but I want to be like, if I have that attitude, then I'm missing the whole point. And that's what, when we see things as a menu, as you've talked about before, that's that attitude that it creates. It's like, well, you have this for them, but like, where is this for me? And when you see it as a roadmap, you realize that it's like, okay, hey, I've gone through spiritual transformation. I have been a disciple. I've started to make this my own. I've started to engage. Well, now what are you going to teach me? It's like, no. Like your job is now to be unleashed to go teach others. Yeah. And so that's why I think that is actually, it works really well when you see those two sides. Be like, if you can help them understand your job biblically is now to go back and help these. Yeah. And guess what? By teaching them, you will learn more than we could ever teach you. And I think that's the big thing, is helping them understand. It's like, turn the ministry over to them and say, you're going to learn way more by your friend asking you a tough question than me teaching on it, because now it's real. And now you're trying to actually learn and search for yourself. And we all know we learn more when we actually have to teach it. You've used that analogy of the bomb diffusal class, where it's like, hey, here's bomb diffusal, pay attention.
Might use this one day, maybe not.
Versus, hey, there's a bomb outside and I'm going to show you what to do. And then I'm going to leave the room and you guys are going to have to figure it out. It's like,
oh yeah. Wait, like the green wire or the red wire? Yeah.
And so I just found, like, if you see that as competing, chances are we might have contributed to some of that by teaching a menu approach versus showing a roadmap of like, this is what it looks like to grow in Christ. And then we're constantly going back and bringing others up with us, and we're going to learn more teaching.
It's huge. Yeah. All right. So and my thought on that too is, if we, that kind of the quadrant that we've talked about before about the high will, low skill. And sometimes the church kids, whatever, can be in that high skill, like they know a lot, but they don't really care a lot.
Yep.
The high skill, low will.
Yep.
And so we, when we think of like, people to focus on as student leaders, whatever, like we think of like, oh, the church kids that are coming to everything, but like if they don't have compassion for the lost, if they don't have a, motivation to grow, like in their relationship with the Lord, not that we're like disregarding them, but it's like, but we're going to go with the goers. Like we're going to focus on the kids that are like really motivated to learn. And a lot of new believers are in that category. So I would say balancing those needs. If we have that approach to balancing the needs, I think we can have that menu mentality of like, oh, how am I serving like up a cheeseburger to this person, but this person wants spaghetti, and I want, and we can, really focus on preferences and even, but instead like using a roadmap to say, okay, these are the 4-chair discipleship model that we use. Like, chair 1, non-believer, chair 2, believer, but, either by time or, maybe just lack of commitment. They haven't grown a lot. They're Christian by name only. You have worker actively serving. Then you have disciple maker, who is literally investing in other people, sharing the gospel, leading them to the Lord, and then discipling them. And so where are you on this roadmap, and how can we advance you to the next step? Yeah. And there's action points on each of those. That kind of, it equals the playing field, where it's like, well, I'm not like worried about like serving the needs of this person. Yeah. But also having a good idea of how, like if you have 98% of your students that are in chair 1, then like
what you teach is going to be different.
You're going to teach a lot. You're going to approach everything a lot differently. Yeah. And if 98% of them are in chair 3 or chair 2, you're going to teach a whole lot differently too. So in other words, just knowing where your students are in the majority of them. And you can say, and I don't use this, like I pull this card out very infrequently, but it's like, if there's pushback from students or even like parents are like, hey, why isn't, my student getting this kind of attention, in this? And it's like, what, at the end of the day, like I'm the one that's going to have to stand before the Lord. And I believe this is what the Lord's calling us to do in this, this season, this moment, to teach on this or to build this foundation for the majority of our students who are in a lesser chair or whatever. And then you can kind of discern from there. But I would use that sparingly. Don't be like, well, I'm the one that has to answer to God, so forget you. Like, no, that's. But within that too, I think having that roadmap versus the menu will be the key. All right. So then the last one, do you want to cover this one?
Yeah. So number 5, 22% of youth pastors say their biggest frustration is having to entertain teens to keep them coming back.
I'm kind of surprised. Well, based on like some of the conversations we've had youth leaders, like I'm kind of surprised it's not higher. Like,
I am too.
Because they have a very entertaining approach.
Yeah.
To youth ministry.
Well,
you Google youth ministry, games come up.
Yeah.
As number 1.
Yeah. I don't know if I would have expected it to be higher too. I wonder if burnout has attributed to that, where so many people are like, they've finally broken down and got to the point where it's like, I can't keep doing this. And maybe, as there's
people are spending like billions of dollars entertaining teens.
Yeah. Well, and as many more like bivocational, I would say, because I know a lot of churches like during COVID like took huge hits and stuff like that. So like maybe many more being bivocational, and they're like, look, I don't even have time to entertain teens. Like it's enough for me to like be able to get my lesson prepped and do these things. But I was actually can't remember who said it, but there was like an Instagram reel I saw or something. And normally I'm like, okay, like I'm good. But this one I actually like watched. I was like, wow, like he actually made a really good point. And he's like, look, if we're focusing on fun, he's like, people aren't coming to churches for fun. He's like, if I'm lost, church is the last place I'm going for fun. Like I'm going to parties. I'm going to friends' houses. I'm going, you name it, whatever. Yeah. The church is not the place I'm going for fun. It's when the church can offer real fulfillment. That's what's going to draw me there. And so that's what I would say too. We've talked about like, we can't compete with the world. Like we've said this, but that kind of gave me a new way to frame it. It's like, if you're trying to create fun, they're not coming to church for fun. Yeah. And that to me has kind of helped me, because even I've struggled with a little bit. Like one of our goals this year is to have a certain number of kids like at youth group, not because that's the goal, but because it just is a byproduct of us making disciples, that they're here kind of helping kids bring their friends. Yeah. And I've even wrestled a little bit. It's like, man, I could probably hit that in one night if I just do this event. And I'm like, but that's not accomplished. Like we can get more kids to youth group by entertaining, but the reality is now we've created a cycle, which is like, you just got to keep doing it.
We've talked about this before, but what you win them with, you win them too. Yep. And so I think this kind of, addresses this, where I think the students that are there looking for entertainment, they originally they were entertained before. And so that's that vicious cycle of like, well, you're not entertaining me. Like, again, consumeristic mindset, like we're no longer focused on moving them forward in a discipleship process, like reaching the lost in our community. We're focused on, a pizza party with games and shooting a poodle out of a cannon afterwards. Yeah. Yeah. Which I don't think that's ever happened. That's just like an exaggeration.
You never know.
I don't know. Maybe back in the 90s. Yeah. It was the Wild West.
PETA was a lot less active in the 90s.
And now I own a poodle, so I'm offended by that. I mean,
I wouldn't admit to that live on air, but that's okay.
Standard poodle.
All right. Those are the top five.
Top five. If you want to see the whole 12,
check out the links below.
We'll put the link.
Yeah. But, all right. So a couple rapid fire questions kind of along these lines. We listed the top 12 youth pastor frustrations. Keith, what is currently your biggest frustration as a youth pastor?
I don't know if it's like, I mean, this is what I think about daily. And I feel like I can't give enough time to like do things in the way that I want them to be done. Yeah. So I feel there's like always this tension, and it might be the season of life I'm in, like, because I have 4 kids, I have a wife,
poodle.
I have a poodle. And so I think for me, my biggest frustration currently is I have more work than I have the ability to do.
Yeah.
And again, like, I mean, and I guess looking back at that, because I've never really said that out loud, yet, but looking back at it, I don't think, I want to say that I've probably always felt like that. Yeah. But maybe it's just accentuated more now that I'm even busier. Yeah. Because I remember like thinking after we had like one kid, it was like, what did we do before we had one kid? And then like after we had 2 kids, it was like, remember all the time we had when we only had one kid? And then like, it was like that every, it's like, and then when we had, 4 kids, it was like, what did we do when we had 3 kids? Like we had all this extra time. And now it's like sun up to sundown. Like by the time I'm waking up, if I don't wake up early before everybody, I'm already behind. Yeah. And so I think that's the biggest frustration. So it's not really like within our youth ministry. It's more about just my own ability to, like, I guess I have a high expectation of what needs to be done. And so, so I'm in a delegation season, where I'm delegating out stuff, or even, stuff that I'm seeing as most important. So like entertainment, way down on the list of priorities when you just don't have enough time. So like, so I think that's my biggest frustration. How about you?
In a moment of transparency and honesty, my biggest frustration lately has been the lack of willingness for people to partner on reaching students with the gospel. And I know that's always kind of been something that's been real.
Yeah.
But we've just been seeing, things that only God can do, like in our youth ministry.
Yep.
And so I'm like, look, we don't have all the answers, but like, this is what we've done. And it seems to be working. And it's like, I just want to shout that to anybody who'll listen, be like, look, I'm not an expert, but this is what we've seen. Like, this is what we made the change. And I can pinpoint, like, you look at every single thing, I can pinpoint, this is what changed. And it just kind of seems like there's so many youth pastors, and and I'm empathetic towards it. Sympathetic, empathetic,
both.
There you go. To where it's like, they're like, no, you don't understand. It's like, I have to be in the office for this many hours and I have to put together this program, and hey, I'm also other duties as assigned. I got to do this. And hey, they want me to do that. And it's like, I will fully admit, like, I have worked less hours in youth ministry since we made this change and seen more growth because I realize it's like, who do I have to become? And so part of this has been like making sure, pouring more into myself and doing these things. And so it's like, when I spend X amount of, time praying for students each day, is that my is that my hours? Like, well, yes and no, but just the reality. So that's kind of been my biggest frustration, is just like, I know what works. Like, I'm not an expert, but this works. And people are like, well, but we've got this going on, and it's like, I can't, it's the will skill thing. So,
yep, definitely. Yeah. All right. So, biggest challenge you faced starting out as a youth pastor?
We started with 8 to 10 kids. And that was really tough. Not because we didn't love
What was challenging
kids.
About that, though?
Yeah, just
because like average youth group size in America is 12 students. So so what's it's a little ironic. Jesus, 12 disciples. Okay, anyways.
One of them you better watch out for.
Yeah. But no, what was hard about that?
Yeah, because it was actually the youth group that I had grown up in, and when I had graduated, it wasn't 10. And so
it had dwindled down. Yes. Like, so you had an expectation of like, because it was a larger church.
Yeah.
And so, just to have that many students was not, meeting the.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody, I guess here's probably the biggest obstacle I faced, because I was actually talking with somebody responding to their question in one of the youth pastor groups we're in. And it's like, there was 10 kids at youth group, but there was 60 kids at the church. And so it was like, just come to youth group. And so I had to get past that, like, that challenge of like, I got to reach all these kids in our church. And that's when I realized, I'm like, hey, I'm not necessarily, like, I'm the youth pastor of the kids in the church, but really I'm the youth pastor of the kids who want to be shepherded. Like, so again, go with the goers. Yeah. That was probably my biggest obstacle, was like understanding, look, like, you got to understand that, like, you can only help those who want to be helped.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. I think, I'm thinking back, cause this was like decades ago.
Was it the late 1900s?
Yeah, or? Late 1900s. No, it wasn't that late.
It's the early 21st century.
It's like 2005. Well, actually, so I was a part-time youth pastor in college.
Okay.
And I just remember, like, so even though I had lived out my faith as a teenager, felt the call to youth ministry as a teenager, studied youth ministry in college, I still didn't feel like I knew what to do. Like, I remember, like, just getting my first, first full-time job, and just like starting and been like, okay, what do I do this week? And so even though, like, I had a youth ministry degree, like, I had ideas and stuff. So but it's just like the practical aspect, like, of how do I spend my time? Like, what am I going to do to maximize my time to, for the biggest outreach? And so, so I think the biggest challenge I faced was just having a plan, like having like a step-by-step, like, practical plan of like, how do I spend my day? Yeah. Like, what's the best way? And I obviously I worked that out over time, but it took me a couple of years because, and it took me having to be laid off from that position, like, to not get paid. And then I stayed for 6 more months and I worked another job. So I had to be bivocational for me to prioritize what had to be done. Yeah. In the right order, because I just couldn't physically do everything. Yeah. And so, but with that, though, I think that was the biggest challenge, was like, just the practical, like, how do you spend your time the best?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, we're going to move into some 1-minute questions quickly. And today's 1-minute questions are actually going to be our best shot at some of these common frustrations. Mm-hmm. And so, Keith,
Wait, hold on. Do we have I need to get a timer.
Yeah, there you go. So 45% of youth pastors said that lack of consistent participation was their biggest frustration.
Yep.
In 1 minute, Keith, what are ways to increase consistent participation among students in your youth group?
Yeah, in short, FOMO. So if they feel like they're missing out on something, so in the book Switch, which is the subtitle is like how to change when change is hard. So basically they studied like behavioral change, the psychology of it. How do you get people to do what they want to do and what they feel like is necessary to do? You help them to see that they're missing out. So a fear of loss or a promise of reward. And not that we're in the psychology game of like manipulating people's behavior or whatever, but at the end of the day, like if you want to see someone to do something, you have to appeal to what they call the elephant brain and not the rider brain. So a logical approach would be like, you should come to youth group. And that would be the rider. The elephant, which is more powerful than the rider of the elephant, that literally you can't just pull the elephant by, with the rider, is I want to come to youth group because I'm missing out if I don't come. And so if you get that desire to come, like where they see like that they're missing out if they don't, I think you're making strides to consistency.
Yeah. Chip and Dan Heath, Switch, how to change things when change is hard. I don't know if you recommended that to me. You must have.
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was transformational in how I approached.
Crazy, like fascinating read. And to understand that like we have a limited amount of willpower and it decreases as we go. That was like, now I still haven't like really put that in practice in my own life, but it was really cool to learn.
Work out in the mornings.
Yes. Which I failed to do this morning when my alarm went off. But anyways, so yeah.
All right. So your 1 minute question. Let me get the timer.
I got a timer right here.
Oh, you do?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll share the stat first. So 68% say parents are not prioritizing their teens' spiritual growth. That's a big frustration among youth pastors. So Ryne, what is the best way to get parental buy-in for your youth ministry?
Prayer, and specifically texting parents, asking them what you can be praying about for their kid. Because prayer, even for those who aren't spiritually mature or even like spiritual at all, prayer is seen as a way that we can show we care for their kids. And so I just started texting, a letter of the alphabet a night. Hey, how can I be praying for you or your student? And that's when I started seeing parents reaching out more and parents buying in more. And in fact, had one man I had texted about his daughters in youth group. I texted him probably 5 or 6 times. Hey, how can I be praying for you? No response, nothing. And I was like, I don't want to like look at this text. I'd be like 7. I sent another one. And finally on the 7th text, he was like, hey, actually, if you could pray for me, I really want to trust Christ, but I'm struggling with some doubts. Where can I start? And, I was like, well, here you go. And so if you pray for them over time consistently and you keep reaching out, they'll see you care about their kids and they want people to be involved in their kids' life who care about them, and they'll prioritize your youth ministry.
It's huge.
Yeah. So
58 seconds.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that concludes another episode of Beyond the Youth Room. If you are wanting to train your students to be missionaries to their schools, we have a free training available, and it's our student missionary training through Edge Clubs. And you can go to edgeclub.org/training to access that student missionary training for free. You can sign up for it. You can show it to them in one session or break it into a couple different ones if you'd like. But the idea is that we want to train more students to advance the gospel in their public middle and high school. So go ahead and sign up for that training.